I started in 1994 as an ordinary architect and urban planner. Worked in new cities and in architecture design for villas and other malls and other architecture fancy projects. Then suddenly in 1998, I was thrown into informal areas. And since then, I'm digging inside informal areas. So I moved from urban planning to urban upgrading. Then I moved from urban upgrading to urban development, which is wider than urban upgrading. Then we moved to integrated development. I discovered that urban development is not enough. I mean that I discovered that the problem of informal areas is not urban. It is socio-economic problems. It's socio-economic issues that led to this situation. So I tried to think about local economic development and then moved to the integrated development approach that any development should be integrated, social, economic, environmental, and this will be translated into urban form or urban setting. And then, of course, we have the issue of sustainability of any urban context. So, we know that the three main bubbles of sustainable development, social, economic, and environment. And here we define the urban regeneration or urban renewal as a program of land redevelopment after use, often used to address urban decay in cities. It is about clearing out blighted areas in inner cities to clear out slums and create opportunities for higher class housing, businesses or more. Okay. So you can find this definition about urban renewal, but what I'm trying to highlight here is a certain type of urban renewal is dealing with informal areas or slums. So before we move to informal areas, we have to think about the sustainable structure of any community. It starts with the base of the pyramid, which is the natural structure. It includes the climate, the topography, the water sources. This is the base of the pyramid. And then at this piece of land, with these natural settings, we have people living on this piece of land. This is the social structure. And then these people start to make like economic activities, like fishing, like agriculture, like tourism, whatever economic activity. So this is the economic structure of the community. Then there is a political structure, which is how people organize themselves, how they provide services, how they manage their lives and relations between each other. Then we have the cultural structure, which is the culture of the community that manages the behavior of the people and the community and all the cultural aspects. At the top of the pyramid, there is the physical structure. So we can say and see from this that the physical structure is a translation to all these aspects together. That means that the architect is not affecting the other aspects, but rather than translating all these aspects into architecture or urban form. So now we move to the elements of sustainable communities, and I'll skip the text and move to this diagram. You can see the city or a sustainable community as a combination between built environment or buildings and some systems. Okay, the buildings include the housing, the services and facilities, and the infrastructure, the roads and public spaces, or the economic structures like markets and so on. While the systems can be seen as infrastructure systems, not infrastructure buildings or structures. So we have the water and sanitation, the energy, the telecommunications, the traffic and transportation, the solid waste management systems. And we have the systems, other systems for services, health systems, education systems, youth and sport, cultural and religious systems, and all other services. Then we have the economic development, whether it's agriculture, industry, trade, tourism, services, whatever economic development or economic activity in a community. Then the missing part in most of our cities in Egypt, which is the governance, the management, how we manage our development. So we have part of it is the municipal services, and then we have the investment management, the social affairs, the environmental affairs, the services management, all these management aspects or governance. So these are the systems that complement these buildings. Then we move to the elements of urban context. We define informal areas as, according to GOP, the General Organization for Physical Planning in 2006, informal areas are all what was built by community without planning or legal license, whether one story or more, even shacks. There are areas built on lands which are not designated for buildings, as stated in master plans of cities. Buildings could be in good status structurally, but they can be unsafe, socially or environmentally unsafe, and missing basic services and infrastructure. So, if we look at this definition, it defines informal areas according based on its legal status, whether it's formal or informal, or according to the characteristics and status. Is it in good structure or deteriorated? If we put this into this small matrix, we have formal areas with acceptable physical structure. This is planned areas like planned districts like Mohamed, Doqi, Madinat Nasr. But if it is formal areas but deteriorated, we can find this in old quarters and core villages. If it is informal and acceptable, we have the unplanned areas like Dakrur, like any area built on agricultural land. And then finally, we have the deteriorated structures with informal legal status, which can find in unsafe areas. In 2008, it was the creation of the Informal Areas, Informal Settlements Development Fund, ISDF, and they categorized the informal areas into unplanned areas and redevelopment areas. And then they defined the unsafe areas into 4 categories. The first category is life-threatening hazards, as first priority, like the buildings built on cliffs or on railways. The second category is inadequate construction materials or deteriorated buildings, like shacks and unsafe buildings. The third category is health hazards, like areas built on swamps or under the high voltage gas lines. And the fourth category is the social insecurity. All these are considered unsafe areas. So quickly we have, without looking at the numbers, we can look at the yellow spots. This was the core villages in Greater Cairo region in the 50s. From the 50s to 1977, this was the growth of formal areas, the red spots. And then until 91, this was the blue spots. And then the green spots until the year 2000. So we have noticed the growth, the huge growth of informal areas in Egypt that leads that about 60% of the inhabitants of the Greater Cairo region live in formal areas. So what is informal areas? You can see in this picture 2 settings. One of them is in Mohammed, and the other area is Bulat Dakrur. What are the differences between these 2 areas? You can find the differences in the urban pattern. the availability of green spaces or public spaces, the width of streets, the urban fabric, the availability of services. Okay. But when we move to other areas like Al-Khattaba, Al-Al'am, this is historic area, but the setting is considered informal. But if we dig inside, we find it's not informal, it is historic setting. So what we have to question ourselves, what the difference between historic districts and informal areas. So it's not easy to answer these questions just by observing the satellite image. This is another example of building on agricultural land. You can find these wide streets. It usually was what used to be canals, irrigation canals, terra. And these are extension over agricultural land. You can find that they follow the land lines, the land tenure lines, خطوط الأحواض الزراعية. This is informal areas on desert land, and you can find clearly that the topography has the upper hand in defining the shape or the form of the urban development in this area. This is Manshiet Nasser, by the way. You can find the topography here is defining how the area is built. This is another example of inner city informal area, or used to be informal area. ده مثلث ماسبيرو. And allow me to talk a bit in Arabic about this specific example, because I made a short study about this during the international competition for upgrading مثلث ماسبيرو. مثلث ماسبيرو كان جزء من فولاء أبو العلا، المنطقة اللي هي ممتدة من السبتية أو فولاء أبو العلا لغاية ماسبيرو. اللي حصل بعد كده القاهرة الخديوية حصل فيها تأثير إن اتمد طريق 26 يوليو بيوصل لغاية فندق ماريوت هنا، فلما قطع المنطقة نصين ابتدى ياخد يمين وشمال مباني بشكل مختلف، بشكل بينتمي أكثر للقاهرة الخديوية. فده كان أول تأثير عمراني أو مروري، نقول مروري أو يعني حاجة زي كده. بعد كده حصل تأثير سياسي بعد الثورة. حصل ان اتبنى مبنى التلفزيون ومبنى وزاره الخارجيه وشويه مباني ثانيه بتعبر عن دوله ما بعد 1952 اللي حصل فيها التاثير السياسي. ابتدت المناطق دي وزاره الخارجيه والتلفزيون ياكلوا شويه بشويه من المنطقه اللي هي كانت ممتده لغايه النيل. في الحقيقه منطقه ماسبيرو كانت البناء الرئيسي للقاهره، حتى لغايه دلوقتي في الشارع الصغير ده اسمه شارع ساحل الغلال اللي هو قصاد التلفزيون. ده كان الساحل اللي بتقف فيه المراكب المحمله بالغلال وتتوزع على بقيه المناطق في القاهره. لغايه لما حصل الغزو ده سنه 52 للمباني الحكوميه اللي بتمثل هيبه الدوله او شكل الدوله الجديده. فده كان تاثير برضه سياسي عمراني. بعد كده حصل اتبنى هنا فندق هيلتون في السبعينات والسبعينات، وبعد كده وراء المولات اللي حصلت، فده كان غزو اقتصادي من بعد الانفتاح. كل الحاجات دي كانت مؤثرات اثرت على المثلث وادت الى انكماش الكتله العمرانيه بتاعته. فاحنا لازم نفهم التاريخ بتاع المنطقه مشيت ازاي واتطورت ازاي، وده ممكن نلاحظه بسهوله من الصور الجويه، بس كمان لو دورنا في الكتب التاريخيه في المراجع التاريخيه ممكن نكتشف حاجات كتير قوي عن المنطقه. من الكلام ده نكتشف ان المنطقه اساسا ما كانتش منطقه عشوائيه، بالعكس هي كانت منطقه تاريخيه وليها تاريخ حافل، لان المنطقه دي كانت ميناء رئيسي للقاهره، فكان منتشر فيها حرفه الشياله، الناس اللي هم الشيالين والحمارين اللي هم بيعبوا البضايع على الحيوانات والحمير وكده عشان يوزعوها على بقيه مناطق القاهره. نتيجه كده فاسره محمد علي استعانت بيهم في تجهيز العربيات الملكيه. عشان كده هنلاقي في طرف المنطقه هنا في متحف المركبات الملكيه. تمام. فكل دي لازم التاريخ عموما، الكلام ده ملوش لازمه دلوقتي المنطقه اتشالت بالكامل الحمد لله. طيب next we have another example of inner city informal areas. This is called Dair Nahya in Do'i. This used to be a village and then surrounded by planned district, which is Do'i district, which planned in the 50s maybe. And they left the original village as it is, as a pocket inside the city. Then we have this another example, which is Gzirat al-Baba. You can find here clearly the area that I'm pointing. I don't know whether you see the pointer. I'm pointing with the mouse. Do you see the cursor?
Yes.
Okay. This was the original village, and this was the extension of an agricultural land, and this was the buildings built in the 50s and 60s for the public housing surrounding the area. Okay, so you can tell the history of the area by just observing simple observations over the satellite images. And this is another example of a village and extension of agricultural land and wide streets that used to be canals, water canals. And this is the extension of on the city peripherals over the agricultural land. So we have to ask ourselves, is it normal to extend the informal areas over agricultural land? From the ethical point of view, of course not, because we have scarcity in the agricultural land and we have to preserve it. But when you plan formal areas like Monsin and Do'i on agricultural land, so the speculations on the land besides just adjacent to these formal areas was very high. So the economic value of these lands, or the economic price, let's say the price, not the value. So the farmers found out that it's much more feasible for them to transfer all these lands into urban development. So it's simply a very clever decision of them. So we have to think when we take a decision to make a new city, what is the impact, the future impact of this city? Will it stimulate building, stimulate new informal areas, informal settlements, or not? And this is another city peripheral informal area. This is Azbat al-Haggan at the peripheral of the city, in Nas City. But we can find peripheral areas inside the city. This is the extension of Manshiat Nasr. It's inside in the heart of Cairo, but it is isolated due to topographic reasons. So unplanned or informal areas have certain typologies. It starts like this with agricultural land, and you build a single building, and then you build other buildings beside it. This has a legal tenure, but illegal building, of course, because it's built on agricultural land. But afterwards, it's consolidated like this, and then the government starts to provide services and provide infrastructure. So you cannot say that this is informal area in terms of services or infrastructure, because you have all the infrastructure provided into the area. So you can categorize it as semi-formal buildings or semi-informal. It's serviced after it was built. Then you have the old rundown inner city neighborhoods, which has the legal tenure but deteriorated structures. And you have the squatter housing compartment like Manshiat Nasr and the Khairallah, other areas, with illegal tenure and illegal buildings, of course. And you have other types, which we call الإسكان الجوازي أو الإسكان معرفش ترجمتها إيه، يعني اللي هو في المناطق اللي هي مش المفروض تبقى إسكان بس الناس تسكن فيها زي المقابر. The city of the dead living in a cemetery. So you can classify the formal areas according to its legal status and characteristics and safety and security, the location within the city, whether it's isolated or integrated into the urban fabric, it's on the peripheral of the city or in central location, according to the growth, whether it can be extended horizontally or densification, vertical extension. or according to the political status, whether it's in the focus of the political decision or not. For example, Maspero was in the focus of the political decision due to the prime location of the area. So, if we put all these factors together, we can define the intervention strategy for an area. For example, if you have an area with high population and with no legal status or weak legal status, and all these factors, we put them together, and then we decide what to do with this area. That gives us lesson number one, that we have no single solution for any informal area that fits all informal areas. Every area has its own situation that we have to study the history, study the location, study all the demographic situation, study the economic situation of the area. Then we decide what to do with this area. We put the intervention strategy. So we have some different approaches for dealing with informal areas. The first one is services and infrastructure provision. The second one is sectoral upgrading, like, for example, providing schools by the Ministry of Education, providing health units by Ministry of Health, and so on. Of course, this is not comprehensive approach, but it's considered as an added value to the area anyway. Then we have the approach of planning and partial adjustment, and this is the famous example of Hay Salam in Ismailia, which was this was the original, the white one was the original area, and this was the extension area that was vacant, and it was planned. They put the services in here to serve the area, and then they set back lines, they approved Tanzim, and they put some incentives to the residents to rebuild their houses according to the new limits, according to Tanzim. And this, according to these incentives, they build their houses. Now the area is reasonable area. Of course, it's not 5 stars, but it's a reasonable area instead of shacks. Then we have another approach, which is the total complete in situ redevelopment. هو الإحلال الكامل في نفس الموقع زي اللي حصل في الدويقة area and زينهم مساكن زينهم. And then we have the redevelopment and relocation, which is in my opinion, the most unpreferable thing to do. But in some cases, you have to do it. In some urban areas, unsafe areas, for example, you have to move people away from the original location. Now we move to the executive framework, how to how to deal with these areas. So we have inner city areas upgrading. We have to gain support from local administration through formal framework and approvals. And then we coordinate with sectoral ministries like the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education and so, and mobilize the resources and connect with private sector and make the coordination with other technical agencies. So our role here as planners will be the coordination. So we work with and for the community and make the communication and the coordination and support the participation and resource mobilization. And that answers the question of the role of the urban planner and the role of the architect here in this situation. So we should not dictate our solution or our thinking on the community, on an existing community. We have to listen to the community and listen to all the factors, whether it's natural factors or the social structure or the economic structure of the area. We have to look at all these factors and then work with the people to find the strategy or to deal with this area. So we move to the participatory development, which is by definition is the process of improving living conditions for the community by involving stakeholders in proposing, planning and taking decisions, and implementation and management and maintenance of local development projects that efficiently utilize local resources through formulating more appropriate solutions that lead to building trust among all stakeholders. So our partners in this process will be local administration, the local public councils, the community members, the NGOs, the youth and women leaders, the local private sector. And here I can take this part in Arabic. كان لينا تجربة لطيفة جدا في مشروع كنا بنعمله لما كنت في الهابيتات، كان في المنيا، في قرى في المنيا للتنمية المحكمة. وكان عندنا مشكلة إن إحنا مش قادرين نقنع الناس ان السيدات لازم يشتركوا في البروسيس بتاعه التخطيط المشاركه. فجت زميله لينا وقالت انها تقعد مع السيدات لوحدهم، وقدرنا نقنعهم ان هم يبقوا عضو في اللجنه اللي احنا شكلناها في القرى عشان خاطر تقوم بالتخطيط. اللطيف بقى ان السيدات لما كانوا بيقعدوا في وسط المجموعه الكبيره اللي هي فيها الكبارات بقى بتوع القريه والرجاله بتوع القريه وشيخ البلد ومش عارف مين الناس دول اللي هم الناس مهمين في القريه، كانوا بيقولوا كلام معين عن المشاكل والاحتياجات والكلام ده كله، بينما لما بيقعدوا لوحدهم بنعمل جلسات مخصصه للسيدات فقط كان بيطلع كلام عكس ده تماما. فعشان كده ده بيؤكد ان احنا فعلا لازم نضمن دخول السيدات والشباب والفئات المهمشه في عمليه التخطيط بشكل فعال وقوي، ونضمن انهم ما يتاثروش باراء اللي هي بنسميها القيادات المجتمعيه او الاطراف الاقوى في عمليه المشاركه. فعشان كده انا بقول احنا لازم switch to English again. We have to listen to all the vulnerable groups carefully and ensure they have voices, and we should ensure we listen to their voices. So, what are the benefits of participatory development? Of course, it is more efficient and it builds the ownership of the development interventions. So the people feel the ownership of the process. اللي هيقرب من الكلام اللي احنا عملناه ده احنا هناكله، احنا اللي عملنا الكلام ده واحنا اللي بنيناه واحنا اللي خدنا القرار في انشاء الوحده الصحيه دي اللي شاركنا فيها وبمجهودنا وبفلوسنا، فاللي هيقرب لها هناكله بايدينا. So building the ownership is crucial in this process, and of course it builds more empowerment to the community members, especially vulnerable parts of the community, women and elderly and other marginalized groups. So the partners in this process are the government, the private sector, and the civil society. Each partner provides some support to the process of integrated and sustainable development and gains some benefits from this. By the way, I leave the presentation to you afterwards so you can read it thoroughly, but I'll just quickly go through it so that we have a good chance to discuss some ideas together. So we have some types of participation, like participating by opinions, giving opinions, and participating with resources. You provide labor, you provide money resources, you provide in-kind contributions. But you can also participate with experience. You have technical experience, organization experience, managerial, marketing experiences, so you can share with them. So this is different types of participation. This is the most important point in this presentation, which is the levels of participation. Okay, level 1 with low participation. This is done by informal. You make the plan and then you go make a public hearing and inform the people, okay, I made this plan, just sign if you are with it. So this is informing, this is low level of participation. The second level, you can step a level above by making people, making the community participate in data collection and give feedback. So you listen to them. Okay. The third level is consulting. You consult the community, you make mutual discussions with them. But level 4, you make them join the work groups. And the highest level, you share make them share the responsibilities. They will be responsible of producing some plans, of course, under your supervision as a facilitator, or you provide technical support in some parts as an architect or urban planner or whatever your specialization. But I mean, you share the responsibility with the community or the officials. So this is the highest level of participation that we want to reach. So I'll skip this part, but just to let you know that the participatory development is is one of the elements of good governance, which has 9 elements: strategic vision, rule of law, participation, transparency, decentralization, accountability, equity, effectiveness and efficiency, and response. So this is the element of good governance, and it puts the residents as the core, yes, residents as the core and the middle part, at the heart of the process of development. Okay, how we deal with participatory development approach? First, we have to know the community. So we make the participatory needs assessment to know the issues and the problems of the community and make that their priorities in this in the area. Then we start to build trust between local administration and community and ourselves, of course, as facilitators, through supporting local initiatives and through other actions that build that trust with the community. Then we make a shared shared database for the information about the area, with spatial information or non-spatial information, so we can create a GIS database. This database should be shared among all the levels. I mean, it's not only at the village level, but also at the markets and government level. So we make sure that it is unified database, so that we don't find contradictions between the at any level. So you have all these inputs and put them into a participatory planning and budget process. Then you make the implementation and process monitoring, and then you go to the participatory impact monitoring. You and monitor the impact of intervention on the long term. And this impact could serve in a completely unexpected way. For example, I switch again in Arabic. كنا بنشتغل في قرية في الواحات البحرية اسمها مش فاكر اسمها. المهم
البويتي؟
لا منديشة كده. هي قريبة من البويتي. القرية دي كان العمده بتاعها او رئيس القريه اخذ قرار لطيف جدا. كان فيها جزء مبني بالطين، ده القريه الاصليه القديمه، وبعدين حصل مطره او في وقت من الاوقات القرى المباني القديمه دي اتدهورت واتبهدلت، فالناس طلعوا بره قرب الطريق السريع وعملوا مباني جديده في الخرسانه. السياح اللي كانوا بيروحوا الصحراء وبيزوروا القريه دي كانوا بيحبوا يشوفوا القريه القديمه المبنيه way of living. فطبعا كان الطريق لغايه القريه القديمه كان معمول مدق ترابي، فالراجل رئيس المدينه قرر ان هو يعمل حاجه لطيفه جدا، ان هو يسفلت الطريق ده. اللي حصل السياح راحوا كتير، ابتدوا الاهالي يرجعوا لمبانيهم القديمه ويهدوها ويبنوها بالخرسانه، ما خلاص وصل لها الطريق. فاللي حصل ان نقطه الجذب اللي كانت في القريه اللي هي المباني الطينيه القديمه ابتدت تندثر وتنتهي نتيجه التدخل اللي هو ظاهره ان هو تدخل كويس من رئيس المدينه او رئيس القريه. فعشان كده احنا كنا لازم نراعي كويس قوي او نفكر كويس قوي في الاثر المستقبلي للتدخل اللي احنا بنعمله. طيب we move to the levels of intervention. We have 3 levels of interventions. The first level is the national level, which we put the policies and make and provide the legislation and other interventions on the national level. But the main intervention level will be on the regional level, which is the government and city level, and the local level, which could be the district or the village. We have other tools that we can use. Of course, talking about these tools can take days, not only this half an hour presentation, but I'll try to skip at least mention them very fast. The situation analysis tools like PNA, Participatory Needs Assessment, and Women's Safety Audit, which is related to assessing the safety of women in public spaces, community mapping and placemaking tools. And we have the trust building tools like promoting local initiatives, and we have the planning tools like participatory planning and placemaking and participatory budgeting and fundraising and resource mobilization and the impact assessment. All these are planning tools. Planning elements, the planning process answers the following questions. What do you want to achieve and why? The second question is, where are we now? Where are we standing now? And the third question is, what are the factors that will help or hinder our progress towards the targets? What is the costs and requirements? And then the question of how can we reach these targets and what are the consequences of achieving the targets? What are the results or impacts of our planned intervention? So we have the levels of planning. We have the national strategic plan. This is the top-down strategic approach. Starts with the national strategic plan, which feeds into the regional strategic plan, which feeds on the government strategic plan and the city strategic plan. And then we move to the other way around, which is the local priorities, which is the bottom-up approach, local area development plan, which feeds into the city strategic plan, and so on until we reach the national strategic plan. So the participatory planning is not a bottom-up approach. It is mixed between a strategic vision, top-down approach, and the bottom-up approach. So we can go up and down until we reach the equilibrium state, with which achieves the strategic vision from the national strategic plan downwards, and at the same time provide the local priorities or fulfill the local priorities of the community. So we can find here that the government at Markaz level are essential levels at this type of planning, because it links between the strategic plans on the national regional level and the city or village bottom-up planning or development plans. I'll skip this because it's can understand it easily. It's the difference between the budget planning and resource planning. In resource planning, we mobilize not only the money resources, but also the local resources like technical resources, the land, the infrastructure. All the local resources can be mobilized so that it is more efficient than the budget planning, which costs or depends on the funding coming from the upper the central governmental entities. So the stages of strategic planning are 4 stages. First, the current situation, and then defining the target, and then how to reach the target, and what are the limitations. The current situations include the actual start and the stakeholder participation and the assessment of the current situation. Then the target, we set the vision and identify the issues and goals. And then how to reach the target, we formulate a strategy and then plan for the action and organize organization and implementation of the interventions. And then we monitor and evaluate the interventions and the impact of these interventions, and we make the necessary modifications, or even we may make replanning of the whole area. So these are setting the vision and the mission and goals and objectives, and then put the necessary framework. So when we start strategic planning, strategic development, we start by knowing the city and identifying the main issues, then we put the vision. After we put the vision, we put three main goals, one of them, or three or four main goals, which are one of them is social cultural, and another one could be economic, and the third one could be environmental and urban. Each goal is translated into objectives, and then this would be translated into strategies, and then fields of action or actions with executive mechanisms. But before we move to this, we have to cross over some general principles like participation, like efficiency and effectiveness, like gender sensitivity, and other general principles that filter our actions so that it fulfills these general principles. Okay, but these interventions could be legislative, could be institutional and organizational, could be planning and information, could be investment and funding, could be executive frameworks. All these are executive frameworks for interventions. For example, in a certain area, you could say that no need for urban intervention, but you can make some decisions from the governor, for example, to provide whatever service to an area, for example, or allow for tuk-tuks or forbid the tuk-tuks, for example, from entering a certain area. Okay, this is legislative framework. Institutional and organizational is related to building the capacities of the local administration, for example, making better organization for the local administration and how they manage the area. Planning and information, it is related to our field work, which is urban planning, how you plan, make a physical plan, or land use plan, or whatever. And investment and funding, we can put some incentives for investment and provide funding for our projects and interventions. So, okay, I know I'm late.
You still have?
No. I'm just finishing successfully. I leave this to you to read and just give some examples of how plans are done, development plans. This is an example of Manshit Nasser again, and this is an example of Takamol. You can find that there is some local solutions that came from the community itself, like this traffic solution that came from the community. And this is another example of Takamol, and this is how we dealt with the committees, the local committees in Takamol. We built, we made like a steering committee or local مجلس الشركاء المحليين اسمه ايه كان هو local council for participation. كان موسل فيه اداره الحي نفسها ومجلس الشعب المحلي، طلع منه لجان لكل شياخه، ودول اللي قاموا، وطبعا ممثلين من المجتمع المحلي، ودول اللي قاموا بعمليه التخطيط التشاركي. And I finish by this famous photo of the user experience and design. This is how the designer made the landscape, the corridors in an area, and this is the user experience. And that's what happens when the designer doesn't listen to the community and doesn't allow himself to learn from the community and the local experiences of the community. thank you for listening, and I'm sorry for being too long, but lots of things to share with you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Samra, for sharing your opinion with us. And I think there are a lot to say and discuss based on the complexity of the issue itself. When we say informal areas or urban informality or informal urbanism, whatever, because Dr. Professor Silman was commenting on he prefers to use urban informality rather than informal areas. But however, I mean, we are addressing the same issue, which we have been facing for the last decades, actually, and there's no magical solution for ending this kind of phenomena, rather than like to collect the efforts from everybody. All the stakeholders have to cooperate and work together somehow to reach the ability and the possibility to change the reality. And I think academia or universities in that case would play a crucial role in this whole complex issue, as we have like students, young researchers with a lot of energy and ambitions, and they can really try to change the reality, and or at least the ugly parts of this reality. So if you have any question, yeah, Mohamed Dabusi asked a question, please.
Uh, Hello, Dr. Hassan. Hello, Dr. Mohammed. I would want to thank you about your presentation. It's really interesting. And I have a comment about one thing. We sometimes missed in our development and on our proposals, that is the time. Sometimes we make the development very late, so the problem become more larger, and sometimes we based on unupdated studies. Sometimes the gap between make a study and implement the project is very large, so it's affect on the availability or effect of the effectiveness of the project. So how we include the time as a factor in our proposals and our structure of the management of the process itself, and what is the range of time? It's 5 years about the planning, or 10 years sometimes. What do you see this point?
اوكي اسمح لي اتكلم بالعربي. اول حاجه انا مش دكتور، وكنت اتشرف ان انا ابقى دكتور يعني، بس انا مش دكتور. فضلت ان انا اشتغل بايدي وانزل واغطس جوه العشوائيات والكلام ده. انت بتسال على عامل الوقت، ان الحاجات دي. طيب مبدئيا التطور العشوائيات ده ما ابتداش يوم وليله، ابتدى من الخمسينات نتيجه لقرارات سياسيه، بعضها قرارات اقتصاديه، وبعضها ظروف البلد، وبعضها حاجات كتير قوي ادت الى ظهورها ونموها بالمنظر ده. وصلت طبعا لمستوى صعب جدا في التعامل معاه. كان يبقى اسهل كتير جدا ان احنا نبتدي نتعامل في بدايه الموضوع، اول ما يبتدي ينزل اول كشك كده في حته الارض الفاضيه، شيل يا عم، الحق اعمل البتاع ده، تمام. بس ده ما كانش بيحصل، وكانت الدوله ساعات بتغض النظر او الحكومه بتغض النظر عن العشوائيات لاسباب كتيره قوي، منها مثلا بنبقى في وقت حرب ومش عايزين مشاكل، عايزين ايه نضمن السلام الاجتماعي، يسيب الناس تاكل عيش، يعني ايه حافظ على ثبات الجبهه الداخليه، تمام. ده كان من ضمن مثلا، يعني ده مثل بس على الاسباب ازاي ان احنا وصلنا للمستوى ده. في اسباب ثانيه اقتصاديه، ان احنا عندنا مثلا الضغط على الاسكان في مناطق زي الدلتا. انت لو تشوف حتى في جوجل ايرث ترجع الخرائط السابقه، شوف الاراضي الزراعيه بتاعتنا بتتاكل بمعدلات ضخمه جدا جدا. الكلام ده كله نتيجه طبعا والاراضي هناك غاليه جدا. انا برضه من اساسا كفر الشيخ، فانا عارف ان هناك الاراضي غاليه جدا جدا ومش موجوده، لان انت محاط من كل ناحيه باراضي زراعيه، هتبني فين؟ اراضي تكون قليله. اسعار الاراضي هناك والشقق غاليه جدا، اغلى من القاهره. النقطه ان لما تلاقي العمليه بالمنظر ده كده هتكتشف ان الفلاح هيكسب قد ايه يعني من الزراعه. لا، انا احسن لي ابور الارض واحولها لمباني، هكسب اضعاف الكلام ده وخلاص. يعني هبيع اغلب الارض واسيب جزء كده ليا اسكن فيه انا وعيالي، والباقي كله هبيعه مباني وهعيش ملك. انا اللي يخليني ازرع واخد الفتافيت. ففي اسباب كثيره جدا تؤدي. هو في الحقيقه انا شايف ان قرار تحويل الاراضي الزراعيه لمباني بالنسبه للفلاحين والكلام ده كله قرار منطقي جدا وذكي جدا. رغم ان هو طبعا بيضرنا على المستوى القومي، ولكنه في الحقيقه قرار منطقي. انت لو مكانه هتعمل كده. انا يعني قدامك مليون جنيه، فرصه انك تاخدهم، ما تاخدهمش ليه؟ الا لو في حزم في حاضر.
بس انا استاذن لان عندي
الصوت مش واضح يا دكتور.
دلوقتي هضطر استاذن انا، فانا هسيبكم تكملوا الدسكشن، وشكرا جزيلا ونشوفكم بكره ان شاء الله.
شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا حسن. شكرا.
طب دكتور محمد، يعني انا دلوقتي ببقى مثلا في استراكشر اللي هو من اول تحديد